Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome back. Welcome back to the PorscheCooled Podcast. Owner Stories. It's an Owner Stories episode again. I really enjoy these episodes. I really do enjoy talking to other owners around the world. It's something I actually look forward to, and I know you guys do as well. If you haven't been to the podcast before, and I need to say this every podcast episode now because there's a lot of new listeners coming in, a lot of new people telling me they've just listened to a latter episode and whatever, and I never introduced myself properly. My name is Michael Barth. At the moment, I'm recording this podcast in London. I do live in Bahrain at the moment, but I'm from Sydney, Australia. Today, I have Simon joining me very shortly by Zoom. Simon reached out to me, a couple of weeks ago, I guess, and he is a 996 owner. And I think it's going to be a special one because he's not just a 996 owner. He owns a couple of 996s, and you would have seen it in the title, being the GT3 variant. So it's going to be a good conversation. I'm looking forward to it. If you want to be on these owner stories, all you need to do is send me a DM through Instagram. It's normally the best way. You can send it to me at michael.barth, or you can send it to me at PorscheCooled.com. Not PorscheCooled.com, what am I saying? PorscheCooled on Instagram. And then I'll eventually get back to you. No, I get back to you quite quickly. I'll eventually get back to you, but I am very slow at the moment. I'll get back to you. We'll organize a time, and then we'll do this recording via Zoom. So all you need to do is just connect with me by Zoom. And then if you have a microphone or you have a headset with a microphone like AirPods, that's all you need. It's really easy. It's just a casual chat, and the listeners are really enjoying it. So enough of me rambling on. Let me get Simon from Adelaide in Australia, and let's talk about his PorscheCooled owner story. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Owner Stories. Like I said, I've got Simon with me now, and Simon's joining me from Zoom, on Zoom, I should say, from Adelaide in Australia. Hi, Simon. Good evening.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me.
No, I'm glad you reached out. We were just chatting before we started recording that I'll just let the listeners know that Simon reached out to me through Instagram, the best place to get a hold of me. And I thought when I saw your story, I thought, this is a good story. And I know you said, you've had other people who have had similar stories on the podcast before. And the listeners will know what cars you have already from the title. But, I think it's good because I haven't really had a lot of owners with track days, with cup cars. I mean, there's been a couple, there's been John with his GT3, but it's not a cup car. There's been James at Porsche Platz, of course. So I thought it would be a good story. So I think, Simon, just to start it all off, before we get into talking about your cars, the listeners always like the first question. And the first question is, how did you get into Porsche? Was it something that you've just stumbled upon later in life, or was it something as a kid you noticed them, or did a family or a friend or someone near you have Porsches? How did it all start for you?
Yeah, so when I was probably 4 or 5 years old, my dad had a 928S. I think it was an 82 model. And he kept the car for quite a while. I think he had it 8 or 10 years. So, as little kids, that was my first memory of a nice car. And, he's always been into cars since I can remember. And that was the first one. And it was around for quite a few years. And, I remember he used to come home from work in the evening, and I think it had an exhaust system on or something on it, and then the V8 would rumble the window, so you'd hear him coming, and we'd run outside and open the gates for him, and I'd jump in on his lap, and he'd let me sort of pretend to steer the car into the garage. So so that's probably my first memory.
That's a pretty iconic shape to remember as a kid. So your dad bought that car used, or did he purchase it new?
He purchased it used from a dealer in Melbourne called Robert Lane. I don't know if they're long gone now, but it was a luxury car dealer in Melbourne. And I think, the car, it was an 82 model, as I said. He probably purchased it in the late 80s and kept it till the mid-90s. He was always kind of, it was a love-hate relationship. He always seemed to be fixing the car and doing something on it on the weekends, but he kept it, as I said, for 8 years, which is quite a long time for him. And so he must have deep down enjoyed it. So
yeah, I mean, they're really coming back in a big way, the 928s, aren't they? Everyone seems to love them again now. Everyone wants one. So your dad's got that 928. That's the introduction to into Porsche. What happens then? So how old were you when your dad had that car?
Well, as I said, I reckon I was about 4 years old, and he probably, I would have been, I think he sold it in 96, so I would have been probably 9, something like that. So yeah, as a young kid, that car was around for a long time, and so.
So when you're growing up, is that the only Porsche that your dad had? So when you're a kid, does he when you sold that car after those many years of ownership, did he buy another one?
He didn't. I remember him looking back when he got the 928. He wanted it. He really wanted a 911, so it would have been a G series. But my mum didn't like the interior. I think it might have been Pasha or something like that.
Right.
She wasn't a fan of that interior, so
yeah, fair enough.
He got the 928 instead.
Right.
But no, he then sort of diverted away from them and went to Japanese cars, and so that we used to kind of influence him a little bit, and he would influence us. We used to egg him on to buy certain cars and that sort of thing. So
that's great. So it's in the family.
Yeah.
All right. So let's jump forward then, because I know we've got a few cars to get through. Let's jump forward. When you first start thinking, okay, I'm going to get my own car, and most people don't just jump straight into a Porsche. What did you jump into? What was the first significant car that you bought that you still remember today and was pretty special?
Well, the first car I ever had was a Honda Prelude. It was a third gen, so that would have been a late 80s, that wedge-shaped car, and that was shared with my brother. So, it wasn't really my own car, but my first own car would have been a Toyota Supra, what they call a Mark III. So I had a Japanese import. It's called a JZA70. So they had the iconic 1JZ engine, the 2.5 litre twin turbo, and it was an R model. So it had Recaro interior, and it was quite a rare car. There were only probably 10 to 15 in Australia. So I kept that for probably 5 or 6 years through my university days, and then ended up selling it when I did a bit of traveling after university, and ended up selling it halfway through that trip to pay for the rest of the travel. So
probably a car you wish you still kept today, right?
Well, the guy who bought it from me still has it. He was sort of needling me to buy it for a couple of years, and I ended up selling it to him. I something small happened. I think the ECU burnt out or something like that, and I just had enough of it. And so I thought, well, I needed the money, and being a poor ex-student traveling through Europe, so I thought it was a good time. So
when does the Porsche come into the fold? When does the Porsche start? You start going out there and you start looking to find a 911 or a Porsche or whatever. How does that come about?
Well, I was always, obviously, like I said, as a kid, we had, that experience with Porsche, and then that went away for quite a while. And I probably started noticing them again around the time the 996 GT3 was first released. So late 90s, so 99. There was a guy in Adelaide who's had, a number of these cars, and he's still to this day owns GT cars. And he had one of the first. It was a white, this is a Series 1 Club Sport. Okay. And I remember seeing that on the road in Adelaide. I was still a fairly young kid at that stage, and then probably didn't really get, it didn't become a serious proposition until around about 2012. So this is, going back a little while, but I was on a forum, and they all loved 911s, and that got me sort of interested in them. So,
so it's only been quite recent then when you started thinking I'm going to get a 911. So 2012. Yeah,
2012. Yeah, I played with lots of Japanese stuff before that. So,
and I just want to say to the listeners, Adelaide, if the listeners aren't aware, I'm sure listeners in Australia are, but Adelaide seems to have a really good concentration of car enthusiasts. And it seems to have a lot of dealers that sell quite unique cars. Is that true in saying that, Simon? It always comes across as being like a really strong Porsche culture in South Australia, especially in Adelaide.
It is. That's very true. The thing is, we had the Formula One Grand Prix from 1985 to 1995. So most people around the world would recognise Adelaide from those years, and so it's got a fairly rich motorsport heritage, and Porsche and motorsport go together pretty well. I'm sure everyone would agree. And I believe Porsche Centre Adelaide sells more GT cars per capita than any other Porsche dealer in the world.
Yeah, it's every time I look at but every time I look at cars for sale in Adelaide, there always seems to be not only just really unique Porsches for sale, whether it be at Richmond's or Porsche Centre or wherever it is, but also Ferraris and things like that. There seems to be some very special cars driving around in those Adelaide on those Adelaide roads. That's for sure.
There is. There's a lot of really nice, rare, expensive metal tucked away that you don't see, but also big supercar culture, and we've obviously dealerships like Zagami have come over from Melbourne to set up here in Adelaide to expand. So
yeah, true. All right, so let's get in. So we're in 2012. You're on one of the Porsche forums, the Australian Porsche Forum or wherever it is, and you start thinking about 911. So what's the first one you bought, and how does that come about?
So the first one I bought was a 996 GT3. So I did look for a number of years and procrastinated quite a bit. And I came really close to buying a black 996.2 clubsport in 2013. But at the time I chickened out. I sort of did a little bit of research and understood they were a fairly bulletproof car, but I was probably scared of the maintenance costs and just dipping my toes in the water. So I went and bought a Lotus instead. And I got a little bit bored of that. So that would have been 2013. Then I ended up getting the GT3. It was a touring. I bought that in beginning of 2015. So that was a 996 GT3, local car in Adelaide. So.
Okay, so you're buying it before the prices went too crazy.
I did, yeah. That was a bit of a motivator because I just had a bit of a feeling that, that they'd really hit the bottom. And I think at the time there were probably 10 or 15 996 GT3s on car sales.
Yeah.
This car was in Adelaide. Had it not been in Adelaide, I probably wouldn't have got into it. So I think it all happened for a reason.
So how do you get all the information that you need to make the decision on this car? Is this from talking to other owners on the forum? Is this from just normal research? I mean, what do you do to ensure that this is the right GT3 as your first 911?
Well, yeah, to understand whether it was the right car for me, not that particular car, but whether the GT3 was a good proposition. I got chatting to a guy on a forum who, and this wasn't actually a Porsche forum. It was just a widespread sort of car forum that had a big interest in 911s. And this guy, he'd had about 18 or 19 GT3s and over the years. He was a dealer as well.
Okay.
And so he gave me a lot of advice on the things to look for, the pros and cons, what modifications are desirable, and what and the particular car that I ended up with had all of the work that he suggested needed doing. So in terms of performance upgrades,
okay,
that was a particular car I ended up with.
So
the
tell
reason
the
it appealed
listeners.
to me.
Sorry, Simon. Tell the listeners exactly what you bought. So it's a 0.1 GT3.
No, it was a 6.2. Comfort spec. So it had the leather Recaro buckets, and it had the dealer fitted optional cage. So not the Club Sport 6-point bolt-in cage.
Okay.
But yeah, this particular car, the owner who'd had it for probably 2 or 3 years, he'd spent quite a bit of money on it. He'd built it up to do track days, and so he did all the shorter gearing. It had rose jointed suspension everywhere. It had cup car dampers. Lots of weight reduction. Had a cup rear bumper, cup exhaust system. So probably $70,000 or $80,000 tipped into it.
Okay. So was was that the sort of GT3 you were looking for? You were looking for something that had been slightly modified that could just go straight to the track when you bought it? Is that what you were searching for, Simon?
Absolutely, yeah. The goal was to do track days. So, and not track days every weekend, but I wasn't buying the car to commute to work and back. I wanted something that I could obviously drive on the street, but have it be able to perform well on the racetrack. So,
Sorry, go ahead.
I didn't really want a standard car. It just didn't appeal to me. Coming from the Lotus Exige, that was a fairly hardcore vehicle, and so I didn't want to feel like I was taking a back step. And obviously, having owned both of those cars now in hindsight, obviously the GT3 is a much more superior car, even in standard form. But at the time, I was really looking for something with some modifications.
But the Lotus is supposed to be quite a good driver's car, right? It's a good car to learn track work on and to take it to the track for the first time, isn't it? Isn't that the sort of thing that people do with the Lotus? And what is the other one I heard on a podcast the other day? The Evora S. Is it the Evora S? Except the gearbox is terrible.
The Evora. Yeah, so the Evora is more of a GT style car, whereas the Exige is based on the Elise sort of platform. This was a Series 2, so shorter wheelbase car, and still had the 4-cylinder Toyota engine, but upgraded supercharger. It was a Cup, so it was actually one of only 5 in Australia. It was quite a rare car. Okay. Full roll cage, fire suppression system and everything like that.
Yeah.
So
wow, cool. Yeah. So you've got the GT3, you've got the 996.2 GT3. It's optioned really well. It's ready for the track. How is that? Is this the car you still own today? Is this the black one, or is this a different car?
No, so this car was also black. It was the straight black, so non-metallic. And no, I don't have it anymore. I sold it in 2017, so I kept that car about 2.5 years.
And how was the experience? Tell the listeners how it was on the track and what made you look at selling it.
The car was unbelievable. Honestly, now having had a Cup car since, it was the closest thing you can get to a Cup car with an interior and registration plates, without actually having the Cup. So it was fantastic. The reason I sold it was I was doing a lot of track days with the vehicle, and there were a few guys in the local Porsche club in South Australia that, we all sort of came up through the ranks, so to speak. We got GT3s at the same time, and a few of those guys ended up buying Cup cars. So all of a sudden they were leaving me in the dust with their slicks. And
so it was the obvious decision. Yeah, it's like, and I know James at Porsche Platz, and James has been on Owner's Stories before, and he's also done another episode here with me on PorscheCooled. And, I always remember what James said. He said, that it got to the point where you just outdrive the car as well. Is that what you found with the GT3, that you just needed something more? Your skill level is getting so much better and you just need something more?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was there was one particular event called the Adelaide Motorsport Festival, which unfortunately is now no longer. But they used to run a small section of the Formula One track in what's called Victoria Park Racecourse. So yes. Really fantastic event with, amazing atmosphere. And the first year I was to do it, the car, I broke the gearbox the week before. And so I missed it. And so the next year I did it. But by that stage, my buddies from the Porsche club had already bought their Cup cars. And, there was just, I vividly remember we were in the middle of a session and I was keeping up with them, and then their slicks switched on and that was it. They just, left me for dead. So that was probably the point at which I realized I'd run the distance with the car, and, and also the values had gone up quite a bit as well. And I was starting to worry a little bit about throwing one around on the racetrack pretty hard. So the Cup cars were still really cheap back then, and it just, it seemed to be, the right way to go.
Okay, so that's the deciding factor. So you've got your well sorted 996 GT3 upgraded, and then you decide to look for something else. So obviously you're going to look for a Cup car. How do you go about that?
Well, it wasn't really that straightforward. It was quite a long gap between selling the road car and acquiring the Cup car. We had some family personal stuff go on as well, as a lot of people do. We were renovating a house. We'd just had our first child, and so it was. I had someone contact me who was quite interested in the road car, and so it took quite a while to do the deal because he was from overseas and moving back to Australia. So that was fairly drawn out. And once in the background, I'd had some conversations with Cup car owners. James, to one, we talked about, his first car, maybe looking at purchasing that, but he was in two minds. And there was another guy in Adelaide with another 2004 996 who also was sort of in two minds about whether to sell it or not. So
I want to ask you two things, actually. I want to go back to the selling process of that GT3. Was it difficult? Was it difficult to sell because of the modifications done on the car and because of the track work? Was it like a much smaller window of people you had to buy that car, or was it just other things that were holding up the sale?
Well, I didn't really want to put it on car sales for that very reason. I was probably a little bit worried about it, and probably more worried than I should have been. Because it seemed that there are a lot of people out there that wanted that sort of car. So I actually sold the car on the local, the Australian forum. So I put a post up, and, it was very much a expression of interest type thing, and had someone contact me, and we went from there. And he wanted all of the modifications. That was a big selling point for him. So.
Okay, that's great. So this is on Porsche Forums Australia, is it? Is that where you sold it?
Yeah.
So, okay, and I think I asked James this question as well, and I can't remember his answer, but when you went from the GT3, the 996, did you think maybe I'll get a GT3 RS, or was it just not enough, or was it the value of it? What made you go from the GT3 that's slightly modified that you had to a Cup car?
The thing with the GT3 RS is, the 996 GT3 RS is, I've not driven one, so I can't comment on how they feel and
crazy
how they
money,
perform.
though.
I know crazy money. I know a couple of guys that have them, and I'm spoken to them. One guy in particular who I speak to quite a bit, and the thing is the level that my road car was at, it was over and above a GT3 RS by quite a long way. So it would have been a step backwards for a lot more money. So it just didn't add up. So.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Understand. So a thing that surprised me, actually, and I think this is when I saw, and I'm just going to refer back to James again at Porsche Platz, when he put his Fitzgerald racing car up for sale on Collecting Cars, and I know it didn't sell on Collecting Cars, and then he put it up privately, I think, or he put the price up on Instagram. I won't quote the price, but I was surprised that Cup cars aren't, well, relatively, they're not that expensive. If you just want to solely, track car, etc., you wouldn't go in RS anyway, because the Cup car has got so much more and the money you spend is a lot less. Am I right in saying that?
Well, yeah. And again, it probably comes down to individual cars, and I think a lot of people are intimidated by the prospect of a Cup car. The first thing that people come up to me, if I'm at the track and there are people there that don't know much about them and they want to come up and just have a look, the first question they ask me is, how's the engine? Because everyone thinks that with a Cup car the engines just explode after 40 hours. The reality is they go a lot longer. Okay. In actual fact, there's particularly for the 996, and this is what I love about the 996 GT3 is the road car versus the Cup car. It's very similar. They're almost the same car. There are obviously the Cup is turned up to 11, and that's just through a number of small little bits and pieces, but that make an overall quite a big difference. So
okay, so tell the listeners. So you've sold the GT3. How does the Cup car come about, and where do you find it?
So I sold the GT3 in 2017. I didn't buy the Cup car until about 12 months later. So I found the car on My 105, which for non-Aussies, it's a race car classified site, much like there's a number of those around the world, but this is it's a fairly antiquated, outdated style of website. and the car had been listed. It was online for a long time. It was online for probably 18 months, I would say, and not a great deal of information about the history of the car, just very vague ad. And it turns out the car was being sold on behalf of the owner by a workshop who basically ran the car for him.
Right.
And it had a fairly serious accident at Bathurst in 2009. So the guy that owned the car was actually the second owner of the vehicle. He bought it as a fresh ex-professional car when it had done with its Cup car, Carrera Cup duties when they switched to the 997 platform. So he'd had it a long, long time and raced it for a few years and then had a fairly big smash at Bathurst. I think he injured himself. He broke a few ribs and was fairly shaken up by the whole ordeal.
Okay.
Spent a lot of money repairing the car, and that took a number of years. And I think by the time the process was over with, he was just past it. He'd had other cars, and so yeah. So
you go to look at this car though. So you found this car. It looks like it could be okay. How do you check a Cup car? This is what I'm trying to work out. Do you take a mechanic that knows about it with you? How do you actually make sure that it's going to be okay?
You have to take a bit of a leap of faith with the 996. It's sort of like going down a dark hallway, without the lights on. And that's mainly because, these cars at that time and now they're old cars. And so, a lot of the history, and I will say also old cars, and a lot of them seem to have been sitting for a number of years without being used, and that's because they weren't competitive anymore on, in a racing situation. So the way I look at it, the cars are kind of in no man's land. They're not yet a classic, and they're an old race car that's outdated. So because of that, they get neglected. A lot of the history goes missing, and so you've really just got to do your due diligence, make sure you have it well inspected. In this case, because the car had been sort of just brought back from a fairly big repair and not turned a wheel, they were offering a shakedown, which is very rare for when you're buying a car at that level. I'm sure it happens a bit more on the high end with really expensive modern machinery, but so the car was in Melbourne. I flew over there to, there was a lot of toing and froing, probably for 8 to 10 weeks, just getting information and that sort of thing.
Right.
We did a PPI that came up good. And then,
Sorry, Simon, just for a second. PPI for a Cup car. Are there specialized people that do PPIs for race cars, for Cup cars, or is it just your usual PPI?
No, you wouldn't do a PPI on a Cup car at a Porsche dealer or anything like that, because
that's what I mean.
There's a lot of little things. I mean, essentially, yes. Obviously, they're not going to look at things like the glove box light not illuminating and that sort of stuff.
But is it a specialized race person that does this inspection for you?
Well, you'd want a specialized shop who's got experience in running those cars doing the inspection. Absolutely. So.
Okay.
And it's probably a little bit simpler than a road car because you're focusing mostly on the mechanical aspect, So.
But I think it's a good point that you said, these cars are getting old. They've been driven hard. Some have had multiple accidents. You know what I mean? So you have to overlook these things, don't you? So what is the main thing that you're looking for? You're looking for the reliability of the engine? You're looking for the integrity of the engine? Is that what you're looking at?
Well, I mean, the engine's the most expensive part on the car. So that's paramount. So, a leak down test, compression test, and the gearbox, you can't obviously test that if you're not driving the car. So you're obviously looking for any receipts for previous or recent overhauling and that sort of thing. But to go away from that, I mean, because this car had been in an accident, and a lot of them have been, find me a Cup car that's not been smashed. They don't exist.
Right.
They've all been crashed at some point. So you do probably want to look at that and check that it's straight. And if there have been repairs, they've been carried out to a good standard. So the car had been completely resprayed. It had a lot of new components on it. And so that was quite appealing to me as well. And the engine checked out. So, So yeah, we decided to give it a go.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting what you just said, because a lot of the listeners, and I'm sure they're like me, they don't know a lot about cup cars. I mean, you appreciate them, you see them, and, like I said, James has been on and talked about his. But I think it's interesting, for you, it's like it's second knowledge now because you have this cup car. But I think it's good for the listeners to know that there is a big difference, from just looking at a normal Porsche and thinking, hey, I just want a track focused only, GT3 or 911. So I think that's really good advice that you've given. So then you take the plunge, you buy this car. You make a decision pretty quickly once you get the PPI done?
Well, no, because, again, there was more to the story. So we were just due to have our second child. My wife was probably 34 weeks pregnant or something like that. And I'd booked flights to go and do the test. And 2 days before I was supposed to leave, I got a call from the workshop. And he said, look, the car, we've just gone to, get it ready for the shakedown, and there's water in the oil. And I said, okay. No, what's going on here? So he'd suspected that the heat exchanger had failed. So the GT3 has this water to oil heat exchanger that sits right on top of the engine. And it's really common when the cars have sat for so long. Cup cars run mostly water with a little bit of coolant additive, and they corrode, the internal wall corrodes, and so they split. So that was what he suspected. So because I've had the flights already booked, I thought I'll just go along anyway and see the car in the flesh. And I think by that stage they'd had the engine out, because the engine had to come out to get to the heat exchanger. So there was probably another month to get the part from Germany, get it on the engine, get the engine back in the car and everything dialed in. So yeah, a month later I went back to Melbourne. By that stage we'd had our second baby, and I was stretching things a lot with my wife.
I was going to say, not a great child car, not a car you should be buying after you've just had a baby. That's for sure.
Definitely not. I was, I did question whether I was making the right
limits
decision.
there, Simon. You're pushing the limits.
Yeah, definitely. So,
all right, so you got the car. It's sorted. Well, you think it's sorted. You get it shipped back to Adelaide, transported back to Adelaide. How is the first, let's just talk about the drive, because everyone likes to know about the drive. How is that first drive in that cup car, and how was the experience compared to your previous GT3?
Well, the first drive was actually not in Adelaide. It was in Melbourne. Because, as I said, they were allowing me to test the car before I bought it to make sure that everything was good. But by that point, I'd put a deposit down, and it was fairly well a done deal. So, yeah, I mean, it was amazing. It had been, 12 months since I'd driven something like that on the track. So it brought back a lot of memories. It felt instantly really similar to the car that I'd sold, which was good. That's what I was looking for, but just another level above, and that was probably down to the slick tires. So
did it make you feel more confident or less confident?
Well, in terms of the dynamics of the car and, keeping it under control and that sort of thing, it was fine. I was very comfortable straight away. But probably what I wasn't confident in was the mechanical ability and reliability of the car. So because the cooling system had been contaminated with oil, really what needed to happen was all of the rubber hoses should have been changed. All of the radiators should have been changed. That wasn't done. And so the car was buttoned up, sent to Adelaide. And so the first time I drove it in Adelaide, I think we blew a cooling hose.
Right.
Not the way that all of the GT3s that you hear about do. It was different to that.
Okay, so you take it on the track. Sorry, Simon. You take it on the track in Adelaide, and you said all the hoses should have been changed over. Did you know that at the time, or you just thought it'd be okay?
No, I didn't know it at the time, because I was sort of following the lead of the shop who had been working on the car and was selling the car. So hindsight's a wonderful thing. Obviously, when I brought it back to Adelaide, I had my workshop look over it, and they sort of knew what had happened, and everything looked okay. The coolant was clear and that sort of thing. But in that first track day when we popped a hose, buttoned it up, filled the system again, and then split another 2 hoses. I think it was just it was clear then that it had to be done.
Yeah. Was
Yeah.
there anything else that was majorly wrong with the car that you had to rectify apart from the hoses?
No, that was it. So really, once we actually, the only other thing was the fuel pump. That was a little bit faulty. So the power was sort of coming in and out because when the tank was full, it was okay. But as the fuel level would drop, when you're accelerating or braking or cornering, you'd lose fuel pressure and that would sap power. So those were the only 2 things that needed to be done. And once they were done, the car, to this day has been, knock on wood, has been really reliable.
Yeah, so let me just tell the listeners because I forgot to tell them earlier. So if you want to go to Simon's Instagram, it's Porsche Nut 9, number 9, Porsche Nut 9. Have a look at his Insta. There are lots of photos of the car. I'm guessing the Cup car is the red and blue one.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So I just want to go back to the Cup car just to compare it actually. So how is this Cup car different to James at Porsche Platz's Cup car? Is it the same generation? Is it a similar car? Are there a lot of differences between 996 Cup cars in Australia?
It's identical. It's a 2003. James's is a 2003 as well. So these were the first. They ran in the inaugural Carrera Cup Australia series in 2003. So my car was part of Greg Murphy Racing. So Greg Murphy's a fairly prominent Kiwi racer here.
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yep.
Yeah. So, and he raced V8 supercar, and his father managed the team, and they were quite successful. They had, 2 championships, I think, out of the 3 996 years.
Did your Cup car? Did it race with the Fitzgerald racing car that James has, or was different?
It did, yeah, it did. So it was in the same competition. Yeah, same competition. His car, I think, did all 3 years of the 996 era in Carrera Cup, as did mine. My car had a change of livery for its final year. It went to the livery that it's in now. So that's the original 05 livery that's on the car now that I've restored. So.
Oh, so when you buy these cars, they come pretty much plain, do they? They don't have the livery still on them most of the times, or they still have remnants of the livery?
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Obviously, they're all delivered as white cars. Back then, the technology for vehicle wrapping wasn't what it is today, and so a lot of the cars were painted a base color. In which case, mine's blue. James is obviously yellow. And then they apply the decals over the top. So because my car had been resprayed, the guy who had it before me, he liked blue. He'd had a number of other blue Porsches, so he kept the blue color, which I'm really, I was glad.
Yeah, no, it's a great livery. I like the livery of it. It's really cool. It's really cool. So where do you keep a car like that? Do you keep it in your garage with all your other Porsches, or do you keep it on the track? How do you actually store a car like that? Is there anything you have to be aware of, you have to be careful with? How does that all work? I most of the time the car's at home with me. I kind of like to, you can't drive them much. So, I probably drive it 4 or 5 times a year at the most. But I get a lot of enjoyment out of just looking at it, cleaning it, polishing it, doing the things that you can't do I saw the picture where you're washing it. I saw one of those images.
Yeah, so there was a lot of cleaning in the first couple of years because it was a dusty old dirty race car. It's been in storage for a long time. So,
okay, so now you've got the Cup car. You're happy with that. It's like a dream come true in a way. It's great on the track. Have you outdriven it yet? Are you hankering for more power, or is it enough?
I mean, you could always do with a little bit more power, but but. No, I think with the car, as I said, I don't drive it a lot, so there aren't a lot of opportunities to hone the setup, and so I'm pretty diligent with note taking when I'm at the track, and I'll always write down in my iPhone 4 or 5 different things that I think can be improved upon in terms of the setup for the next outing, so that I've got a baseline.
Okay.
So each time I'm going out, I'm getting a little bit faster in the car, and just doing track days at the moment. But I would like to do some racing. So if I can sort of improve the pace a little bit to a point where I feel I can keep up with 997s, then I might give that a go.
So is there races in Australia that you can race the old Cup cars, is there?
Yeah, so in South Australia, you've got it's called sports cars. So it's the state championships, which is run by the Sporting Car Club of South Australia.
Okay. So
they run events at the Ben Motorsport Park and Malala.
Right.
So there's a category called sports cars, which is mostly
that would be fun. That'd be
older Cup cars. Yeah. But it's still, you're racing 991s and 997s.
Yeah,
They've got more power, more grip, more aero.
Interesting.
So,
yeah. All right. So you got the Cup car. You're enjoying the Cup car. When does it come around, the fact that you think, hang on, I want another 911, but I want to be able to drive it on the road?
When I had, for probably 2 years of owning the Cup car, I really didn't miss the road car at all. I just felt I'd moved on. And when I sold the road car, I always had a feeling that in the back of my mind that I'd get another one. And so much so that I kept a lot of parts, little bits and pieces that I'd taken off that car before I sold it.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably a couple of years later, that feeling just disappeared until probably 12 months ago, where the interest in the 996 has just gathered momentum probably over that time, and it seems to be now quite a desirable car. I don't know what spurred that on, but I mean, I've always liked them, but they, for a long time were pretty maligned.
Yeah, it kind of started with the GT3s and the turbos, though, didn't it? And now it's gone all the way down to the base Carreras, people wanting $70,000, $70, $65, $75, $80,000 for a base Carrera 996. But it did definitely start with the GT and the turbo, that's for sure. So
yeah.
So you start searching for another 996?
Yeah, so probably 6 months ago, I really started. I figured I better, if I want to get one of these, I need to get one before they really become out of reach. So in the last 6 months or so, I just was watching the market fairly closely. Quite paranoid about maybe not being able to find what I wanted. This time around, it had to be a club sport.
Okay.
That was my only criteria. I mean, I certainly had preferences for color, but it had to be a club sport and it had to be a 6.2.
Okay. But even so, Simon, in the past 6 months, the prices have they've jumped a lot. I mean, I think I saw one. Wasn't there one advertised, and I don't know if this is your car, but wasn't there one advertised for $179,000 for a 0.2 GT3?
Are you talking about the silver car? Is that the one?
Yeah, I think it was silver.
Yeah, there's been a few on car sales that have come and gone in the last 6 months.
I think there was one at 200 even, wasn't there? There was one that hit 200, wasn't there?
See, a lot of the cars at the moment, now they're all selling off the market. So a lot of them are just selling privately.
Yeah.
And so, but there have been cars that have gone for, 220, 230. So that's sort of like the top of the tree.
Yeah, 997 prices.
Yeah, the gap between 6 and 7 is now, 6.2, 7.1 is very small. So,
so how did you find this car? Tell the listeners how you found it. Was it through the forums or was it advertised? How did you find it, and what car did you find?
So I found the car by chance on Instagram, actually. It wasn't advertised.
Okay.
I was just in the right place at the right time. So a friend and a follower that I follow, he follows me. He's a local in Adelaide. He was sort of looking for GT3s, but wanted a 6.1. Okay. And I think he put a post up on his feed, asking for people to DM him if they knew of any cars. And just reading the comments, there was a guy who was, who said, I've got a Mark II 29,000 Ks if that's your flavor.
Wow.
So knowing this guy who'd put the post up quite well, knowing that he didn't want a Mark II, I thought, well, I'm going to jump in. Normally I wouldn't do that because it wasn't my post, but
Yeah.
I immediately sent the guy a message, and it turned out that we were actually both on the Porsche Forum Australia anyway.
Oh, okay.
Without realizing it. And so, we talked a little bit, and he sent me some pictures of the car. Not many photos. It was a really quick, easy deal.
So 29,000 kilometers. This is the black car, right? It's a black GT3.
Yeah, so it's basalt black it is.
Basalt black. And what other options did it come from the factory with?
So it's a club sport.
Yes.
And the thing with this car is it's never been on the racetrack ever.
Oh, okay.
And interestingly, so never been on the racetrack. The front cage obviously never been fitted. The fire extinguisher was never even fitted.
Okay.
And a fair few owners. I think I'm the fifth or sixth owner, but tracing the history, the car had done 15,000 Ks in 1 year, in its first year.
Yeah.
And then the next, 4 or 5 owners just made it a museum piece. They just didn't drive it.
That's a rare find, isn't it? That's like a collector's car almost, isn't it? That's a rare find to get one with such low kilometers, no track, especially when it's got the front cage as well. Usually they've been tracked, right?
Well, the front cage was with the car but not fitted. So the club sports all came. You received the cage whether you wanted it or not. So
you actually received the front cage on 996s. 997s you don't receive but on 997 GT3s you don't receive a front cage, right? In a club sport package, do you? No.
Porsche worked out they could charge extra. So I think it's about $5,000 or $6,000 for the front section on the 997. So
that's a lot, isn't it?
But back in the 996, they would give you the extinguisher, the front cage, the harness, but they were not fitted at the factory. They were dealer fitted upon request. Right,
I didn't know that. Speaking of GT3s, let me just go off track slightly, and I wonder what your opinion is on this. Autohouse Hamilton in Sydney have a 997 GT3 for sale. Have you seen it, the white one?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a touring with lightweight buckets, which is good. But it's got a sunroof. Would you buy a GT3 with the sunroof?
Definitely not.
Yeah, no, I said the same thing. Steve and I were having this conversation in the podcast that's come out, today, because we're recording these in advance, but the podcast today, we were talking about that. I wouldn't buy one with the sunroof either. I find it very odd because it's been sitting there for some time, and I'm just wondering if little things like that is hampering the sale of that car. Because it's quite low kilometers and it looks like it's in pretty good nick,
Yeah, I think, people, it seems to be that now people are wanting the club sport if it's on offer. It didn't always used to be that way, but it seems in the last, couple of years that's been the way the market's going. The sunroof is a funny one.
It's a weird one, but even GT cars, right? GT3s, there was a time there where not many people really did want them, and that's the problem. And the price now reflects the fact that everyone does want them. So you've got your GT3. It's a seamless transaction. The car's in really good condition. Do you get it checked out before you buy it, Simon? Everyone likes to know that. Do you get a PPI on this one as well?
I didn't actually. I didn't.
Okay.
So and. Usually I'm very pro PPI, but in talking to the seller of the car, there's I think when you're buying and selling cars, there's you've either got an understanding or you don't, and you're almost, they say, buy the seller.
Yeah.
This guy was just really straight up and down, great guy to deal with, and to date it's been the most expensive purchase I've ever made on a vehicle by quite a lot, and it was the easiest and the quickest decision I made. So the car, the reason I didn't do a PPI was I had to act fairly quickly. He was in far north Queensland, which is 6,000, probably 6,000 Ks, not quite that far, probably 4,000, the best part of 4,000 Ks from me in Adelaide, and he's 800 Ks from the nearest Porsche centre. So he was going to sell the car down at Classic Throttle Shop.
Oh, really? And would have sold for a lot more than so you got in before Classic Throttle Shop bought it, did you?
He was going to send it. He'd bought the car from Classic Throttle Shop 2 years earlier or 3 years earlier.
Oh, right.
And so he was just going to send it back there because he didn't want to deal with the difficulty of, given his location. So he sort of said, I think, it was easier for him to sell it to me. He didn't have to worry about shipping the car and paying for detailing and servicing and all of that stuff. So as a result, I probably saved quite a bit of money on the consignment fee that I would have had to pay, because they were expecting he was going to sell it whatever they were put up for. So
which would be a lot more. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it is the situation at the moment. It is the market at the moment where we all like to do a PPI. I mean, we're big fans of it, Steve and I. But you don't really have the time anymore. You don't have the time because you have to be, like you just said, you have to be with these 911s that don't really come around that much, with those sort of mileage and that model, the GT3. You have to be quick. You really do just have to be quick. Otherwise, you will miss out. It will go to a dealer and it'll be, 10, 20% more, or it will go to another seller. So it makes it hard for people who aren't, ready to buy, doesn't it? You really do have to be ready to buy there and then and just do the offer straight away.
Yeah, definitely. I think, sometimes it just works out in your favor. And this was one of those situations. And, I guess I wasn't completely blind. The car had only done 29,000 Ks, as I said, and he did have a PPI from when he'd purchased it, only 2 or 3,000 Ks earlier. So it wasn't the best PPI. It was just a 100-point Porsche dealer check, which was really not that detailed, but I had some history there. So
yeah, I mean, it is about what you said. What we say too is like trust the seller, buy the seller. I was watching Jerry Seinfeld and Spike Thurston on YouTube the other day, and it was about 3 years ago. And Steve sent me this link. It was that event where all the classic cars are in the US. I can't think of it off the top of my mind, Amelia Island or wherever it was, and they were doing a
Concord.
They were doing like a podcast, like a live podcast sort of thing. And Jerry Seinfeld said a lot of his cars, the reason why he buys them is the story, is the person. You know what I mean? It's the person that he bought it from, and that really just pushes him over the edge to buy a car. You know what I mean? Obviously, he's got a lot of money, but it is the story of the car. It is the seller, isn't it? You know what I mean? And it does give you that confidence to go, well, this is going to be okay. And it becomes a story for you to tell as well later on, I guess. It's the same sort of thing.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's, there's some truth to that. And I actually enjoy, when you're buying the cars, I guess, you don't always have the time, like we said, to really delve too deeply into it. But after the fact, once you own the car, I actually enjoy tracing the history. And I've done that with my Cup car extensively, and did that also with this car, and managed to track down on Instagram the original owner of the car, which was nice.
Did you ask them how they did 15,000 kilometers so in a short period of time? How many years did they own that for? The first owner?
So the first owner, he only had the car for, I think, 1 year.
Wow. Okay.
He sold it because he'd had a kid. He was having a kid, so he, I think he did 7,000 Ks. He said.
Okay.
And so, whoever bought it off of him did a few thousand Ks and then parked it. So
that's a great thing to do, to find out all the history, though. You know what I mean? It's not, it's classic-ish, I guess. It's not classic, but it's good to know all the previous owners. So, okay, so you buy this car, you get it, it arrives in Adelaide. First impressions compared to the first GT3 you had, which was slightly tweaked.
First impressions were, it's a real virgin. And I was amazed at the condition of the interior. Probably that was the thing that stood out the most. It's still got the new car smell. There's quite a distinct smell of a Porsche. You get the smell of the leather, which I'm sure everyone who's owned one would probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it must be something to do with the plastics that they use. And so it still had that new car smell, and the 996 interior doesn't wear that well, as a lot of people know. So, that's what I was amazed about. I mean, 30,000 Ks it's small. It's a fairly small number of Ks for a car like that, but by the same token, it's still 30,000 Ks. You've had a lot of owners over a number of years. So I was amazed that everyone who'd owned the car had taken such good care of it. You can tell it's not a car that's ever been used to commute.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at an image on your Instagram that was done, a few weeks back. So you've kept it pretty stock, have you? It looks like it's in immaculate condition, and you've kept it quite stock?
I have, yes. It's not. I don't plan to keep it completely stock.
Okay.
So far, the only thing I've done is fitted the fire extinguisher, which I didn't think too long and hard about. I mean, I just think it's a club sport that extinguisher should be there, and I don't often have passages, so. So we fitted that.
What about the exhaust? Everyone likes to know about the sound. Did you keep the sound as it was, or have you tweaked the sound? Have you added an exhaust to it? Have you done any modifications to the exhaust?
The exhaust is currently still the original. The car is completely original. There are no modifications at all. But I have sourced a 996 cup exhaust system, and I have a spare carbon fiber cup rear bumper.
Okay.
So that's in the process of that's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks. The car will be going in to have that fitted, which I'm really excited about because the factory exhaust is shocking. It's shockingly quiet.
Yeah. The exhaust I understand. Why are you changing the bumper though? If you've got a cup car, don't you want to keep this one as stock as it could be?
I think that I sort of the idea is to have both of the cars. I don't want to turn this into a race car, obviously, but I like the idea of parts interchangeability. So it's part of the reason I sort of wanted a Series 2 because a lot of the parts off the cup car bolt straight on. So
okay,
I figure whatever parts I have for the GT3 can be used on the cup and vice versa if they're needed. So,
but this won't be a car.
Reason.
But you're not going to take this car on the track, are you? Are you going to try it on the track to see how you're not going to use it on the track?
No, I don't think so. Not as long as I have the cup car, anyway.
And so, what else is planned? So you've got the exhaust, you've got the cup bumper. Anything else? I noticed the steering wheel. Is that in the GT3 or is that in?
The steering wheel. I've got I do have a cup steering wheel, which is a really great upgrade for these cars. But I've also sourced the guy who I bought the exhaust system off in Belgium. He had a really good condition RS 996 RS steering wheel and shifter knob, so they're Alcantara instead of leather.
Yep, very cool.
I fitted them. I prefer the cup wheel because it's slightly smaller and it's lighter because there's no airbag and it's also dished, so there's a better driving position.
Okay.
I haven't fitted it yet because I had one on my old road car. The main issue with the cup wheel in the street car that a lot of people might not realise is it blocks your view of the tacho because the wheel was smaller and the steering column is not. It's telescopic, but it doesn't move up and down. So it just annoyed me in my road car, my last one. So I've sort of held off. I may fit it and try it out, but for now I'm enjoying the RS wheel. So, there's not a lot planned for the car. I don't want to. Anything I do will be simple bolt on and off modifications. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Because they are appreciating so much, aren't they? I mean, the 996.2 GT3 is just appreciating so much. Are there any issues that have come up with the car? Anything you've had to get fixed, Simon, that the listeners might be interested in? Any repairs that you've had to do, or everything's been
the only thing? Well, I haven't had a lot of time with the car and haven't done a lot of driving in it, but it was due for a major service when I bought it, so I took it straight down to have that done. And when they did the service, it got a clean bill of health. The only issue was the coil packs had some minor cracks in them, so which is quite a common issue. And it wasn't. I didn't know about it. The car was running faultlessly, but they, because the spark plugs were due, they had the coil packs off and inspected them. So we did that. That's the only problem I've had. So
right. Well, that's good. I'm looking at one of the. I'm just going to go back to your Instagram because I've got it in front of me, open when I'm talking to you. But there's a shot of the rear shot of the car of the 996 GT3, where it's just showing the rear. And I was talking to Steve the other day because his cousin-in-law just picked up the yellow speed yellow turbo that was for sale on car sales. He bought that a week ago.
Yeah, that looked like a nice car.
Yeah, so he bought that a week ago. So Steve went with his GT3, his 997.1 GT3, and with Marco, his cousin-in-law, down to Royal National Park in Sydney. for a drive, and I had a picture of the back of the car, and it's weird, you see the 996 turbo, you see the GT3, and how similar. You think they're so far removed, but the shape and the lines and the design, it's so similar, Simon. You know what I mean? And I'm just looking at your 996 here, and maybe I'm going off track, but I'm looking at your 996, and it's pretty close to the 997, isn't it? When you look at it at the back, I mean, there is differences, but it's not that far removed. It's actually got a really nice stance to it, the 996. In some ways, I'm almost thinking the 996 GT3 is it a better GT3 than the 997? Why did you not? Was there anything in your mind at the point when you were looking for this GT3 that you thought, hey, I can stretch it and I'm going to get a 997?
I mean, probably when I was, when owning a GT3 wasn't really a realistic proposition. I probably lusted after the 997 because that was the newer one at the time. This is going back a while, obviously back to when the 7.1 was new. So,
yeah.
But probably the thing that got me interested in the 996 initially was just that it was the one I could afford, which is probably the case for a lot of people that buy their first GT car. But since I've had, the experience of owning them, I've really, and I have driven a 997.1 for a short period of time, a friend's car that I looked after for a couple of days, and there's really not a lot of difference between them. I mean, if you were blindfolded, I don't know you'd be able to tell the difference.
Right.
So I guess you go for the one you like the look of. But in my case, everyone could argue that the 997's a better looking car. Yep. I think looks are subjective. But,
yeah. Buy the one you can afford. That's what we always say, isn't it? Buy the one you can afford. Buy it now and don't miss out and enjoy it. Enjoy it straight away. Yeah. That's the main thing. What was I going to ask you? I was going to ask you something else about the GT3 and now I've just forgotten. Oh, the GT2. You mentioned in your message to me about GT2s. Have you driven a GT2?
I have. So my dad has a GT2 that, again, I found it for him on the one of the guys on the Porsche forums was selling it. And, he was sort of looking at a turbo and then this car came up and I said, this might be a one to get. So
996?
996, yeah. It's
not that silver one with really low kilometers, is it?
The one this car's got about 50,000 Ks on it.
Oh, okay, so, different one. Okay,
yeah, different one. It's had an engine rebuild and bigger turbos in the hands of the previous owner. So it's a very powerful car.
I was going to say, how does he find it? Because a couple of weeks ago we had Scott on from the US. I had Scott on from the US. I don't know whether you listened to that one. And he had the 996 turbo. He had a Cayman S, and he's got sorry, Scott, 944. I think it's a 944. And then just before the episode went live last week, he said, I've sold the Cayman S and I've sold the turbo cab, and he bought a GT2. And I asked him how it was, and he said, the first drive was a bit hairy. It was a bit scary because it kind of twitched a bit. How did your dad find it? Was it hard to handle?
I mean, for him, he's not really into track driving or any of that sort of stuff. So, from my point of view, personally, I like the sensation of going around corners and the challenge of trying to get around the corner, in and out of it, through it as quick as possible. And so the GT2 doesn't naturally appeal to me. I think it appeals to those guys who like the straight line performance more. My dad's probably in that category, so it's a good car for him in that sense. Yeah, I mean, I think, he daily drives it, not for the whole year, but he's got it quite a few cars, and he'll sort of cycle through them and, register them for a few months of the year. And so he in the summer, he usually daily drives that car. So yeah, he enjoys it. I mean, I've driven it a few times, and it's really just like a GT3 with two turbos. That's, everything else is the same: the suspension, the ride, the handling.
But experience-wise, you prefer the GT3 though? For the
I do, yeah. Although, as I said, it's a GT3 with two turbos. The fact that it's got that torque from the boost, it changes the way you drive the car completely. With the GT3 being a car, you've got to be up it all the time to get the performance, keep the momentum up to maximise your pace. Right, and so with the very hard to do on a public road, mind you. Whereas the GT2, you probably get a little bit more enjoyment out of it on a road, in a public road setting, because you can give it a squirt and throws you back in the seat. So.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it's the first time I've ever listened to it. And I don't know whether you listen to it. It's called the Car Chat Podcast.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, the Car Chat Podcast. And it's an interesting one because it's got Alex from Sharkworks. One of the guests on that episode is Alex from Sharkworks. And I'm sure you've heard of Sharkworks, right, in the US?
Yeah.
And he talks about it, Alex, and he was big on tuning turbos. He was big on getting the most power out of turbos. That's where he sort of first got into like the business with his Porsche business. And then he was talking about the GT2, and he said the GT2 is a really good car. The GT2 is a really good car. He said, but it's not a car you can just jump into for a day or 2 days. You really have to live with it for a month, and then you'll understand it. So I wonder if that is about the power delivery and in your mind, where you've come from, Simon, you know what I mean? But he did make that point that just live with it for a month, and it is a really, really good car.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you have to really treat the GT2 with a lot of care, because, being a 911, it's obviously in that era, no nannies, as they say. There's nothing to save you, So if you're on it and suddenly you break traction and you get the tail out and then you panic and lift off, you're in a lot of trouble pretty quickly. Yeah. So it just happens a lot quicker because of that power delivery than it would in a GT3. So
well, I have to say, you've got great cars in your family with your dad's GT2 and your GT3 and the Cup car. That's a nice 3-car array there in a photo, that's for sure. And that 996 GT2 of your dad's, I mean, they're a really beautiful looking 911. They really are a beautiful looking 911.
No, they are.
All right, Simon, we're almost at the hour. Let's just I always like to ask this question, and I always like to ask the question, because you've got a Cup car, I'm going to ask the other question that I asked James as well. So you've got the Cup car. Is there a track in Australia, or is there a track anywhere that you would really like to take your Cup car to and drive it?
Well, we've got the Bend Motorsport Park in Adelaide, just outside of Adelaide. That's only 3 years old. It's the second longest permanent racetrack in the world behind the Nordschleife. So we're pretty spoiled, and it's a fantastic facility to drive at. But probably if I could drive anywhere else, I think it'd have to be Phillip Island. Okay. It just, a fast flowing track, and really suits the 996 or any Cup car really. That would be the one in Australia anyway. There's lots of others internationally that I'd love to drive at, but they're a little bit less realistic. So.
True. So what about the GT3? The GT3 on the road, it's a great car on the road. Around Adelaide, you've got some great roads in Adelaide, I think, for sure, right? So tell the listeners, if someone's coming to Adelaide and they want to take their 911 or their GT3 around the area, what's one of your favourite roads?
Yeah, so I actually live in the Adelaide Hills, so those roads are on my doorstep, which is great. But any of those roads, you're only 20 minutes from the city, and you can probably spend a whole day, in a very small geographical area on lots of different roads. But probably an easy one to get to and enjoy is Gorge Road, and it's quite a long road. Okay. And it's just the closest thing. A lot of the roads in the Adelaide Hills are quite windy and bumpy, whereas Gorge Road, it's got lots of long sweeping corners, and there are parts where the surface is really flat, almost like a racetrack. Not that you drive like you're on a racetrack when you're there. You shouldn't do that. But of course. You can certainly enjoy yourself without getting into too much trouble. So
Fantastic. All right, that's about it. We're almost at the end. Is there anything else you want to tell the listeners, Simon, before we go?
No, not particularly. No, but thanks for having me along for the chat.
No, thanks for coming on the podcast. And I'm just going to remind everyone that you should go and follow Simon on Instagram. It's PorscheNut9, number 9, PorscheNut9. So go over to Instagram, say hello, and give him a follow. That's great. I mean, like I said, Simon, you've got, I'm a fan of the 996 GT3, or if you don't, I am a fan of the 996 GT3. I always think they're out of my price range. No, I think that they just got too expensive. Maybe they're still out there. Maybe they're just hidden and people aren't advertising them. But it's getting harder and harder, definitely, to find a GT car at a good price, isn't it?
Yeah, it is getting that way, but there are cars out there, and you just got to shake the tree, so to speak. Just speak to the right people, because as we said, a lot of these are not being advertised, and they're stashed away with people that are in two minds about selling them, and some of them can be convinced to do so. So,
all right, Simon, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, that's it for Owner Stories. This is number 34. That was Simon coming in from Adelaide, 996 GT3 and 996 GT3 Cup. Until next time, bye for now.